Hello and welcome. If you're here today, chances are you, or someone you care about, is navigating the challenges of depression. First, I want to acknowledge your courage. Just showing up is a powerful act of self-care. This ACT-based program is designed for anyone experiencing low mood, hopelessness, emotional numbness, or feeling stuck in painful thoughts. Whether you've tried other therapies or this is your first step, ACT offers a fresh, empowering approach. This session is for individuals struggling with depression, anxiety, or emotional overwhelm. Those who feel trapped by negative thoughts or self-criticism. People who want to live a more meaningful life, even with pain present. Anyone seeking tools to build psychological flexibility and inner strength. ACT doesn't aim to eliminate difficult emotions. Instead, it helps you change your relationship with them, so they no longer control your life. ACT stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. It's a science-backed psychological approach that blends mindfulness, values-based living, and behavior change. Rather than fighting your thoughts or feelings, ACT teaches you to accept them, commit to meaningful actions, and build a life worth living, even when things feel hard. ACT was developed in the 1980s by Dr. Stephen C. Hayes, a clinical psychologist and professor. At the time, Hayes was battling panic disorder himself. Traditional therapies weren't helping, so he turned inward, asking what if the problem isn't the emotion itself, but how we respond to it. This led him to explore mindfulness, behavioral science, and the philosophy of human suffering. ACT emerged from this journey, not just as a therapy, but as a compassionate framework for living. Hayes collaborated with Kelly Wilson and Kirk Stroessel, and together they shaped ACT into a powerful model now used worldwide, from clinics to classrooms to corporate wellness. Stephen Hayes' story is deeply personal. He grew up in a working-class family, faced emotional challenges early on, and later developed severe panic attacks that disrupted his career. Instead of hiding from his pain, he studied it. He realized that trying to suppress or control emotions often makes them worse. Through his own healing, he created ACT, a therapy rooted in acceptance, compassion, and action. Today, Hayes is a leading voice in psychology, author of over 40 books, and a passionate advocate for mental health. His journey reminds us, healing doesn't mean perfection, it means progress, purpose, and presence. So as we begin this ACT journey together, remember, you don't have to feel better to start living better. You don't have to be fixed to be fulfilled. You just need willingness, curiosity, and a little guidance. Let's explore how ACT can help you reconnect with what truly matters and build a life that feels whole, even with pain.
In this session, we'll explore how acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, offers a powerful, evidence-based approach to managing depression, not by eliminating painful thoughts, but by changing how we relate to them. Here's what we'll cover. 1. Introduction to ACT. We'll begin by understanding what ACT is and how it differs from traditional therapies. ACT is rooted in mindfulness, behavioral science, and values-based living. It helps us accept what we cannot control and commit to actions that align with what truly matters. 2. Core processes of ACT. ACT is built on 6 psychological processes that promote flexibility, acceptance of difficult emotions, cognitive diffusion to unhook from painful thoughts, present moment awareness, self as context, observing self, values clarification, committed action. Together, these help us move from suffering to meaningful living. 3. Implementing ACT for depression. We'll explore how ACT specifically addresses depressive symptoms, like rumination, hopelessness, and emotional numbness, by helping individuals reconnect with purpose and vitality, even when pain is present. 4. Tools and techniques in ACT. Finally, we'll introduce practical tools, mindfulness exercises, values mapping, diffusion techniques, metaphors, and experiential practices. These are designed to be simple, powerful, and usable in daily life. So let's get started.
Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, or ACT, is not just a set of techniques. It was born out of lived experience. Its founder, Dr. Stephen C. Hayes, was himself struggling with debilitating panic attacks in the late 1970s. One night, Hayes was in the middle of a severe panic episode. His heart raced, his chest tightened, and he felt he might die. In desperation, he ran outside into the Nevada desert where he lived. Instead of fighting the panic, he suddenly had a realization: I cannot control these feelings. but I can choose how I respond to them. That moment became a turning point. Hayes stopped trying to suppress his anxiety and instead began observing it, allowing it to exist without judgment. This shift in perspective planted the seed for ACT. From that incident, Hayes developed the idea that suffering is amplified when we resist or avoid our inner experiences. ACT teaches us to accept thoughts and emotions as they are, diffuse from them, and commit to actions aligned with our values. So ACT was not discovered in a lab, it was discovered in a moment of human struggle. That's why it resonates so deeply. It's built on the real experience of turning pain into purpose. So let's delve into ACT now.
Let's talk about acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. Now, ACT is a modern approach in psychology that doesn't try to erase or suppress our difficult emotions. Instead, it teaches us how to change our relationship with them. The idea is simple. Rather than fighting sadness, anxiety, or stress, we learn to accept that these experiences are part of being human, and then commit to actions that make life meaningful. This ability is called psychological flexibility. Think of it this way. Imagine you're stuck in traffic. You can't control the traffic, but you can control how you respond. You might choose to listen to music, call a friend, or simply breathe and stay calm. That shift, from resisting reality to engaging with it differently, is the essence of ACT. ACT is built on 6 key processes. Acceptance means allowing feelings to exist without pushing them away. Cognitive diffusion helps us step back from our thoughts, so instead of saying, I am a failure, we say, I'm having the thought that I'm a failure. That little change creates distance. Being present is about staying engaged in the moment, like noticing the taste of your tea instead of replaying yesterday's mistakes. Self as context reminds us that we are more than our thoughts and feelings. We are the observer of them. Values clarification is about identifying what truly matters to us, such as family, creativity, or kindness. And committed action means taking steps guided by those values, even when it's uncomfortable. Like reaching out to a friend even if depression tells you to isolate. ACT also integrates mindfulness. Mindfulness helps us anchor ourselves in the present and reduces distress about the past or future. For example, during a depressive episode, instead of spiraling into, I'll always feel this way, mindfulness brings us back to the sensation of breathing, grounding us in the here and now. Finally, ACT emphasizes values-driven action. It's not about waiting until we feel better to live better. It's about living according to our values even when discomfort is present. If you value creativity but feel anxious about sharing your art, ACT encourages you to paint and share anyway, because living your values matters more than eliminating anxiety. So, ACT is not about controlling life's storms. It's about learning to sail through them. By accepting emotions, diffusing from thoughts, practicing mindfulness, and committing to values-driven action, we cultivate psychological flexibility. And that flexibility is what allows us to live a rich, meaningful life, even in the presence of pain.
Now let's look at how acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, is applied specifically to depression. One of the first things ACT teaches is the acceptance framework. Depression often brings thoughts like, I'm broken, or I shouldn't feel this way. The natural instinct is to fight those feelings, to push them away. But that constant battle is exhausting. ACT encourages us to accept depressive thoughts and emotions as natural human experiences. For example, instead of saying, I must stop feeling sad, we shift to, sadness is here right now, and I can still choose how to respond. This reduces the struggle and frees up energy for living. The second application is behavioral activation. Depression often leads to withdrawal and inactivity. ACT helps clients take small, value-consistent steps even when motivation is low. Imagine someone who values family but feels too down to visit relatives. ACT would encourage them to start small, maybe sending a text or making a short phone call. These small actions, aligned with values, gradually break the cycle of inactivity and reconnect the person with meaning. Next, ACT uses cognitive diffusion techniques. Depression can trap us in harsh thought patterns like, I'm worthless, or nothing will ever change. Diffusion helps us step back from these thoughts so they lose their grip. Instead of fusing with the thought, I'm worthless, we practice saying, I'm noticing the thought that I'm worthless. That little shift creates distance. It reminds us that a thought is just a mental event, not an absolute truth. This reduces the power of negative thinking. Finally, ACT emphasizes relapse prevention. Depression can be recurring, so ACT equips individuals with long-term tools. By focusing on values and psychological flexibility, clients learn to navigate future episodes more effectively. For example, if someone values creativity, they may commit to painting or writing even during low moods. This values-driven action provides a sense of purpose that helps buffer against relapse. The idea is not to eliminate depression forever, but to build resilience so that when symptoms return, the person has strategies to stay grounded and continue living meaningfully. So, in summary, ACT helps with depression by encouraging acceptance of emotions, activating small value-based behaviors, diffusing from harmful thoughts, and preparing for the long term through values and flexibility. The overall goal is not to fight depression head-on, but to change how we relate to it, reducing its control and empowering us to live a richer, more purposeful life.
Before we dive into acceptance and commitment therapy, let's start with something many of you may have heard of: cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And if you haven't, that's absolutely fine. This introduction will make it clear. CBT is one of the most widely practiced therapies for depression and anxiety. Its main idea is that our thoughts influence our feelings and behaviors. So, if we can identify negative or distorted thoughts and challenge them, we can change how we feel and act. For example, imagine someone thinks, "I'm a failure." In CBT, the therapist might ask, "What evidence do you have for that thought? Have you succeeded in other areas?" The goal is to restructure the thought into something more balanced, like, "I've had setbacks, but I've also achieved things." That restructuring often reduces distress. Now, ACT takes a different path. Instead of trying to change or challenge the thought, ACT teaches us to accept it and create distance from it. Using the same example, if the thought, "I'm a failure," shows up, ACT would encourage the person to notice it as just a thought, not a fact. We might say, "I'm having the thought that I'm a failure." That small shift helps us step back, reducing the thought's grip, without needing to argue with it. Another difference lies in emotional avoidance. CBT sometimes uses strategies to reduce or manage distress, which can include distraction or reframing. ACT, however, emphasizes sitting with emotions rather than avoiding them. If sadness or anxiety arises, ACT encourages us to acknowledge it, breathe with it, and allow it to exist. The idea is that emotions are temporary experiences, not enemies to fight. By practicing acceptance, clients often discover that the intensity of the emotion lessens naturally. Finally, let's talk about behavior. CBT often focuses on reducing symptoms by restructuring cognitive distortions and practicing healthier behaviors. ACT, on the other hand, highlights actions aligned with personal values. It asks, "What matters most to you? What kind of life do you want to live?" Then it guides clients to take steps in that direction, even if uncomfortable feelings are present. For example, someone who values connection but feels depressed might commit to calling a friend, not because the sadness is gone, but because connection is meaningful. So, to summarize, CBT works by challenging and changing thoughts, managing emotions, and reducing symptoms. ACT works by accepting thoughts and feelings, creating distance from them, and committing to actions guided by values. Both approaches are powerful, but ACT shifts the focus from symptom control to living a meaningful life, even in the presence of pain. That's the key difference trainees should remember. CBT says, "Let's change the thought to feel better." ACT says, "Let's accept the thought and still live better."
Let's take a moment to understand the philosophical roots of CBT and ACT, because this is where their differences really begin. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is rooted in logical reasoning and evidence-based thought modification. The philosophy behind CBT is that our thoughts shape our emotions and behaviors. If we can identify distorted or irrational thoughts, challenge them with evidence, and replace them with more balanced ones, we can reduce distress. For example, imagine a student who fails an exam and thinks, "I'm stupid, I'll never succeed." In CBT, the therapist would guide the student to examine the evidence. You passed other exams, you prepared well, and one failure doesn't define your intelligence. By restructuring the thought, the student feels less hopeless and more motivated. CBT is very much about using logic and evidence to reshape thinking patterns. Acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, comes from a different philosophical foundation. ACT integrates mindfulness and acceptance into the therapeutic process. Instead of asking, is this thought rational or irrational? ACT asks, can I allow this thought to exist without letting it control me? For example, imagine someone experiencing the thought, I'm not good enough. In ACT, rather than debating the truth of that thought, the person learns to notice it mindfully. I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. That small shift creates distance. The thought is still there, but it no longer dictates behavior. The person can then choose to act according to their values, maybe applying for a job or pursuing a hobby, even while the thought lingers. Another way to see the difference is through emotional experiences. CBT often tries to reduce distress by changing the way we think about situations. ACT, however, emphasizes sitting with emotions, even uncomfortable ones, and practicing acceptance. Imagine someone grieving a loss. CBT might help them challenge thoughts like, I'll never recover, by pointing to evidence of resilience. ACT, on the other hand, would encourage them to acknowledge the grief fully, breathe with it, and still take steps toward what matters, like reconnecting with loved ones or honoring the memory of the person they lost. So, philosophically, CBT is about reasoning and restructuring, while ACT is about mindfulness and acceptance. CBT says, let's change the thought to change the feeling. ACT says, let's accept the thought and feeling, and still move toward what matters. Both approaches are evidence-based and effective, but they rest on very different foundations. CBT leans on logic and cognitive science, while ACT draws from mindfulness traditions and behavioral psychology. That's why ACT often feels less like a debate with your mind and more like a practice of noticing, accepting, and choosing. It's not about proving your thoughts wrong, it's about learning that you don't have to obey them.
Alright, now that we've explored the foundations of ACT, let's move into its heart, the core processes. These are the 6 building blocks that make ACT work: acceptance, diffusion, being present, self as context, values, and committed action. Think of them as the toolkit ACT gives us to handle life's ups and downs. And here's something funny about ACT. People sometimes joke that it should really be called accept and continue therapy, because instead of fighting your thoughts, you accept them and keep moving forward anyway. Or another playful one: ACT is the only therapy where having weird thoughts is not a problem, it's practically part of the curriculum. So, let's dive into these processes and see how they help us live more flexibly, even when our minds throw us curveballs.
Now let's move into one of the most practical and powerful processes in ACT, cognitive diffusion. This is where we learn to change the way we relate to our thoughts. Depression often brings heavy, painful thoughts, things like, I'm worthless, nothing will ever change, or I'll never be happy again. When we fuse with these thoughts, we treat them as absolute truths. They feel like facts carved in stone. Cognitive diffusion teaches us to step back and see them for what they really are: mental events, words and images passing through the mind. The first principle here is thought distancing. We encourage individuals to separate themselves from their thoughts, to realize they are not the sum of their mental experiences. For example, imagine someone thinking, I'm a failure. In fusion, that thought defines them. In diffusion, they learn to say, I notice I'm having the thought that I'm a failure. Suddenly, there's space between the person and the thought. They are no longer swallowed by it, they are observing it. The second technique is labeling thoughts. This is simple but surprisingly effective. Instead of saying, I'm anxious, we practice saying, I'm having the thought that I'm anxious. Or even, my mind is telling me I'm anxious. This reduces the literal meaning and emotional weight of the thought. It's like putting quotation marks around it. It becomes something the mind is producing, not a truth about who we are. The third principle is cultivating a flexible perspective. Thoughts are transient and subjective. They come and go, often without our control. By learning to see them as temporary mental events, we reduce their power over our emotions. For example, if someone wakes up with the thought, today will be terrible, ACT teaches them to notice that thought, acknowledge it, and still choose actions aligned with their values. Maybe going for a walk, calling a friend, or working on a project. The thought doesn't vanish, but it no longer dictates behavior. Let me give you a playful example ACT trainers often use. Imagine your mind is like a radio that sometimes plays Bad News FM. You don't have to smash the radio or argue with it. You just notice, my mind is playing that channel again. And then you choose whether to tune in or carry on with your day. That's diffusion in action, recognizing the broadcast without letting it control you. So the main points to stress are these. You are not your thoughts. Labeling thoughts creates distance and reduces their emotional weight. Thoughts are transient, not concrete truths. And diffusion gives us freedom to act according to values even when the mind is noisy. In depression, this skill is life-changing. Instead of being trapped in a cycle of negative thinking, clients learn to step back, observe, and move forward. Cognitive diffusion doesn't erase the thought, it changes its impact. And that shift is what allows people to reclaim their lives, even in the presence of difficult mental experiences.
Now that we've explored cognitive diffusion, let's move into another cornerstone of ACT, acceptance. This is often the most challenging step for people, because our natural instinct is to push away pain. But ACT teaches us that acceptance is not resignation, it's emotional openness, letting go of control, and adopting a non-judgmental attitude toward our inner experiences. First, let's talk about emotional openness. Depression and anxiety often bring waves of sadness, fear, or emptiness. Most of us try to avoid these feelings by distracting ourselves, suppressing them, or pretending they aren't there. But avoidance usually makes the emotions stronger in the long run. ACT encourages us to allow difficult emotions to surface without suppression. For example, imagine someone who feels grief after losing a loved one. Instead of numbing themselves with constant work or entertainment, ACT would guide them to acknowledge the grief, sit with it, and even express it through journaling or talking with a friend. This openness fosters resilience, because when we stop fighting emotions, we free up energy to live more fully. The second principle is letting go of control. Pain is a natural part of life. Trying to control or eliminate it often leads to greater suffering. Think of it like quicksand. The more we struggle to escape, the deeper we sink. ACT teaches that instead of resisting pain, we can allow it to be present while still moving toward what matters. For example, someone with depression might wake up with the thought, "I don't have the energy to face today." Instead of battling that thought or trying to force it away, they acknowledge it and still take a small step aligned with their values, like making breakfast or calling a friend. The pain doesn't vanish, but it no longer dictates their entire day. The third principle is cultivating a non-judgmental attitude. Many people with depression criticize themselves harshly. "I shouldn't feel this way," or "I'm weak for being sad." ACT helps us adopt a neutral, compassionate stance toward internal experiences. For example, instead of saying, "I'm pathetic for feeling anxious," we practice saying, "I notice anxiety is here." This avoids over-identification with the emotion and reduces self-criticism. It's like watching clouds pass in the sky. You don't judge them, you just notice them. So the main points to stress are these. Acceptance means emotional openness, allowing feelings to surface without avoidance, letting go of control, recognizing that pain is part of life and resistance increases suffering, and adopting a non-judgmental attitude, treating thoughts and emotions as experiences rather than personal flaws. In practice, acceptance doesn't mean liking or wanting pain. It means making space for it, so it no longer blocks us from living. When clients learn to accept emotions, they discover that feelings rise and fall naturally, and they gain the freedom to act according to their values even in the presence of discomfort. That's the power of acceptance in ACT. It transforms pain from something we battle into something we carry lightly, while continuing to move toward a meaningful life.
Now that we've covered acceptance, let's move into the next process of ACT, committed action. This is where the therapy becomes very practical. It's about taking steps, guided by values, even when life feels heavy or uncomfortable. The first principle here is value-driven goals. ACT emphasizes that actions should be aligned with what truly matters to the individual. For example, imagine someone who values creativity but is struggling with depression. They may feel no motivation to paint or write. Committed action would guide them to set a small, meaningful goal, like sketching for 10 minutes or writing a short poem. Because the action is connected to their personal value, it enhances intrinsic motivation. It's not about forcing activity for the sake of it, but about reconnecting with purpose. The second principle is small, consistent steps. Depression often makes big goals feel overwhelming. ACT encourages breaking them down into achievable actions that build momentum. For instance, if someone values health but feels too low to exercise, the first step might simply be putting on walking shoes and stepping outside for 5 minutes. Over time, these small steps accumulate, creating a sense of progress and well-being. The focus is on consistency, not perfection. The third principle is overcoming barriers. Life inevitably throws challenges our way: low mood, fatigue, self-doubt, or external setbacks. Committed action teaches persistence despite discomfort. For example, someone may value connection but feel anxious about socializing. A barrier might be the thought, "What if I embarrass myself?" ACT helps them notice that thought, accept the discomfort, and still take the step of calling a friend or attending a gathering. The emphasis is on moving forward even when the mind says, "Stop." So the main points to stress are these. Committed action means setting goals rooted in values, breaking them into small and consistent steps, and persisting through barriers with flexibility. It's not about waiting until we feel better to act, it's about acting in line with our values now, which often leads to feeling better later. In practice, committed action transforms therapy from insight into change. Clients learn that even in the presence of depression, they can take meaningful steps toward the life they want. Each action, however small, is a vote for their values and a step toward resilience. That's the power of committed action in ACT. It turns acceptance and diffusion into real-life movement, helping people live with purpose, even when pain is present.
Now that we've explored committed action, let's talk about how ACT is actually implemented for depression. The process is practical and structured. First, we help clients practice acceptance, allowing depressive thoughts and emotions to surface without trying to suppress them. Then, we introduce diffusion techniques, teaching them to step back from painful thoughts like, "I'm worthless," and see them as mental events rather than truths. Alongside this, we encourage small, values-driven actions, such as reconnecting with friends or engaging in creative work, even when motivation feels low. Over time, these practices build psychological flexibility, which is the core skill ACT develops. To give you a fresh real-world example, a 2025 meta-analysis of ACT for adolescent depression found that young people who practiced acceptance and values-based action showed significant improvements in psychological flexibility and reductions in automatic negative thoughts. One case described a teenager who constantly thought, "I'll never fit in." Through ACT, she learned to label it as, "I'm having the thought that I'll never fit in," which reduced its emotional weight. Guided by her value of friendship, she committed to joining a school club despite her anxiety. Over time, this small step helped her reconnect socially and lifted her mood. So, implementing ACT for depression is not about eliminating symptoms. It's about teaching skills that allow individuals to live meaningfully, even when depression is present.
Now that we've discussed how ACT works, let's look at how we begin the therapeutic journey: assessment and goal setting. This stage is crucial because it lays the foundation for everything that follows. The first step is the initial evaluation. Here, we conduct a thorough assessment of the client's values, avoidance patterns, and how depression affects their daily functioning. For example, a client may report that depression keeps them from engaging in social activities, or that they avoid tasks at work because of low energy. By mapping these patterns, we establish a clear starting point. This helps us understand not just the symptoms, but the impact on life. The second step is values identification. ACT is unique because it doesn't just ask, "What do you want to feel less of?" It asks, "What matters most to you?" We explore areas like relationships, career, health, and personal growth. For instance, a client may say, "I value being a supportive parent," or "I want to contribute creatively at work." These values become the compass for therapy. They clarify long-term goals and give direction even when emotions are difficult. Next, we focus on small steps. Depression often makes big goals feel overwhelming, so ACT emphasizes breaking them down into manageable, measurable actions. If a client values connection but feels isolated, the first step might be sending a text to a friend. If they value health but feel too drained to exercise, the step might be walking for 5 minutes. These small actions provide a sense of accomplishment and build momentum toward long-term well-being. Finally, collaborative planning is essential. Goals are not imposed by the therapist, they are co-created with the client. This ensures engagement and ownership. For example, instead of saying, "You need to exercise 3 times a week," we might ask, "What feels realistic for you right now? How can we align that with your value of health?" This collaborative approach empowers clients, making them active participants in their own recovery. So the main points to focus on are: conduct a thorough initial evaluation to understand values and avoidance patterns, identify what truly matters to the client to set meaningful goals, break those goals into small, achievable steps, and plan collaboratively to enhance ownership and motivation. In practice, assessment and goal setting transform therapy from a vague process into a personalized journey. Clients begin to see that even in the presence of depression, they can take steps, guided by values, that lead to a richer, more purposeful life. And that sense of direction is often the first spark of hope.
When we work with ACT, one of the most important principles is that therapy is never one size fits all. Each client brings their own history, culture, and comfort level, so our techniques must be tailored to individual needs. The first way we do this is through customized exercises. Mindfulness and acceptance practices are powerful, but they need to feel safe and accessible. For example, one client may enjoy sitting quietly and focusing on their breath, while another may find that overwhelming. In that case, we might adapt the exercise into mindful walking, or even noticing sensations while sipping tea. The goal is to introduce mindfulness in a way that fits naturally into daily life. The second principle is context sensitivity. ACT uses metaphors and exercises like cognitive diffusion, but these must resonate with the client's background. For instance, the metaphor of leaves floating down a stream may not connect with someone who has never seen a stream. Instead, we could use cars passing on a busy road, or clouds drifting across the sky. Similarly, values exploration should reflect what matters most in their cultural or social world: family, spirituality, community, or creativity. The third principle is flexibility in pacing. Some clients need more time to process techniques, especially those involving exposure to emotions. For example, a client struggling with grief may find it too intense to sit with sadness for long periods. Rather than pushing them, we start with shorter exposures, perhaps just a minute of noticing the feeling, and gradually extend as they build resilience. This pacing respects the client's readiness and prevents overwhelm. The fourth principle is a strength-based focus. Depression often makes people feel powerless, so it's vital to highlight existing strengths. For example, a client may already show resilience by caring for their children despite low mood, or by maintaining a creative hobby. We integrate these strengths into therapeutic practices, reinforcing confidence and reminding them that they already have resources to draw upon. So the main points to focus on are: adapt exercises to the client's comfort level, adjust techniques to their cultural and personal context, pace interventions flexibly to match readiness, and highlight strengths to build confidence. When ACT is tailored in this way, clients feel understood and respected. Therapy becomes not just a set of techniques, but a collaborative journey that honors individuality. And when clients see that their unique background and strengths are part of the process, they are more likely to engage fully and sustain progress.
When we apply ACT in real therapy settings, we often encounter common challenges. These are not signs of failure, they're part of the process. Let's look at 4 of the most frequent ones and how we can address them. The first challenge is resistance to mindfulness. Many clients say, "I can't sit still," or "mindfulness doesn't work for me." It's important to normalize this discomfort. Mindfulness is not a quick fix, it's a skill that improves with practice. For example, if a client feels restless during breathing exercises, we might reframe it by saying, "It's okay to feel uncomfortable. That's part of learning. Let's start with just 1 minute of mindful breathing and build from there." By treating mindfulness like exercise, something that strengthens with repetition, we reduce frustration and encourage persistence. The second challenge is struggle with values. Depression often leaves people feeling disconnected, unsure of what matters to them. In these cases, we help clients clarify values by exploring moments of meaning. For instance, we might ask, "Can you recall a time when you felt proud, connected, or fulfilled?" A client might remember helping a friend or creating something artistic. That memory becomes a clue to their values: connection, creativity, or kindness. Thought-provoking questions like, "If your life were a book, what would you want the chapters to be about?" can also spark insight. The third challenge is avoidance patterns. Depression often drives people to avoid emotional or behavioral challenges, skipping social events, procrastinating at work, or numbing feelings with distractions. In ACT, we gently address avoidance by validating fears while encouraging action. For example, if a client avoids meeting friends because of anxiety, we might say, "It makes sense that you feel nervous. Let's start with a small step, maybe sending a message instead of meeting in person." This approach respects their fear but still moves them toward valued action. The fourth challenge is fear of change. Many clients feel stuck, overwhelmed by the idea of transformation. ACT helps by breaking change into non-threatening, incremental steps. For example, if a client values health but fears starting an exercise routine, we don't push them into a gym membership right away. Instead, we suggest something small, like stretching for 2 minutes in the morning. Each step builds confidence and reduces the sense of overwhelm. So the main points to focus on are: normalize resistance to mindfulness by reframing it as a skill. Help clients reconnect with values through meaningful memories and questions. Gently address avoidance by validating fears and encouraging small actions. And reduce fear of change by breaking goals into manageable steps. In practice, these strategies transform challenges into opportunities. They show clients that therapy is not about perfection, it's about progress, patience, and persistence. And when clients see that even their struggles can be worked with, they begin to trust the process and themselves.
As we wrap up our discussion on tailoring ACT to individual needs, it's important to recognize that personalization is only one part of the journey. The next step is learning about the tools and techniques that ACT provides. Think of these tools as instruments that are always available to us: acceptance practices, mindfulness exercises, diffusion strategies, values clarification, and committed action. They're not hidden or mysterious, they're part of everyday human experience. But here's the key: most of us don't automatically recognize them or know how to apply them effectively. That's where the therapist comes in, to help identify which tools fit best for each person, and how to use them in ways that feel natural and meaningful. Another important point is consistency. Just like learning a musical instrument or building physical strength, these tools only become effective when practiced regularly. Using them once or twice may bring relief, but it's the steady, repeated application that builds psychological flexibility and resilience. Over time, the tools become second nature, something we can localize and adapt to our own needs, culture, and daily routines. So, as we move forward, we'll explore the practical side of ACT, the tools and techniques that make this approach more than just theory. These are the methods that help clients not only understand acceptance and values, but actually live them in their daily lives.
Let's begin with the first tool in ACT: mindfulness practices. Mindfulness is not about emptying the mind or forcing relaxation, it's about learning to stay present, observe without judgment, and anchor ourselves when emotions feel overwhelming. The first aspect is present awareness. Depression often pulls people into rumination about past failures or anxieties about the future. Mindfulness helps redirect attention to the here and now. For example, if a client keeps replaying a mistake at work, we guide them to notice their breath, the sensation of their feet on the floor, or the sound of birds outside. This shift reduces the grip of past and future thinking, creating space for calmness and clarity. The second aspect is adopting a non-judgmental stance. Our minds tend to label experiences as good or bad, and depression amplifies this self-criticism. Mindfulness teaches patience to observe thoughts and feelings without judgment. For instance, if sadness arises, instead of saying, "This is bad, I shouldn't feel this," we practice noticing, "Sadness is here." By removing judgment, the emotion becomes less threatening. It's simply an experience passing through, not a verdict on the person's worth. The third aspect is grounding exercises. These are simple techniques that help anchor individuals during distressing episodes. Deep breathing is one example, slowing the breath and noticing its rhythm. Another is sensory focus, such as the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. Noticing 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. For someone overwhelmed by racing thoughts, this exercise brings them back into the body and the present moment, promoting calmness. So the main points to emphasize are: mindfulness encourages present awareness to reduce rumination, teaches a non-judgmental stance to foster acceptance, and uses grounding exercises to anchor clients during emotional distress. In practice, mindfulness is not about eliminating pain, it's about changing our relationship with it. By learning to stay present, observe without judgment, and ground ourselves, clients gain tools to navigate depression more flexibly. Over time, these practices become habits, helping individuals live with greater balance and resilience.
After mindfulness practices, the next tool in ACT is values clarification. If mindfulness helps us stay present, values clarification helps us decide where we want to go. Depression often clouds direction, leaving people feeling disconnected or purposeless. Values exercises shine a light on what truly matters, guiding actions and goals. The first step is identifying core values. These are not just things we want to achieve, but principles that give life meaning. For example, a client may realize that family, creativity, or health are central to them. If someone values family, their therapy goals might include spending more quality time with loved ones. If creativity is important, they might commit to writing or painting regularly. Identifying values provides a compass. It tells us what direction to move in, even when emotions are heavy. The second step is bridging goals and values. Goals are the concrete steps we take, while values are the deeper reasons behind them. For instance, if a client values health, a goal might be walking 3 times a week. If they value kindness, a goal might be volunteering once a month. By linking goals to values, clients feel more motivated because they're not just ticking boxes, they're living in alignment with what matters most. The third step is revisiting values. Life priorities change, and ACT encourages frequent reflection. For example, a young adult may initially value career growth, but later realize that relationships or community service have become more important. Revisiting values ensures therapy remains dynamic and relevant. It allows clients to adapt their goals as their life evolves, creating a framework for ongoing personal growth. So the main points to emphasize are: values clarification helps clients identify what truly matters, bridge those values to concrete goals, and revisit them regularly to stay aligned with changing priorities. In practice, values exercises transform therapy from symptom management into life direction. Clients begin to see that even in the presence of depression, they can act in ways that honor their values. And when actions are guided by values, they feel more purposeful, resilient, and connected to life.
After values clarification, ACT often uses metaphors and experiential techniques to help clients recognize the unworkability of past coping strategies. These tools are powerful because they bypass abstract theory and allow clients to feel the lesson in a vivid, memorable way. One of the most common metaphors is the tug of war with the monster. Imagine a client locked in a fierce struggle with a monster that represents painful thoughts and emotions. They're pulling on the rope with all their strength, trying to win. But the harder they pull, the more exhausted they become, and the monster never disappears. The therapist then suggests, what if you drop the rope? The monster is still there, but you're no longer trapped in the exhausting battle. This metaphor illustrates the futility of fighting internal experiences and the benefit of letting go. For example, a client with depression may constantly battle the thought, I'm worthless. Instead of arguing with it endlessly, ACT teaches them to drop the rope, acknowledge the thought, allow it to exist, and redirect energy toward valued action. Another powerful metaphor is the passengers on the bus. Here, the client imagines themselves as the driver of a bus, heading toward a destination that represents their values. Along the way, passengers, negative thoughts, fears, or memories, start shouting from the back, you'll fail. You're not good enough. Turn around. The natural impulse is to stop the bus or argue with the passengers. But ACT teaches that the driver doesn't need to silence them. The voices can stay on the bus, but the driver keeps moving toward the chosen destination. For example, a client who values connection may feel anxious about attending a social gathering. The passengers might yell, you'll embarrass yourself. Instead of obeying them, the client acknowledges the voices and still drives the bus toward connection by showing up. The main points to emphasize are: metaphors help clients see the unworkability of past coping strategies, like constant struggle or avoidance. Tug of war with the monster shows that fighting internal experiences only drains energy, while letting go creates freedom. The passengers on the bus illustrate that negative thoughts can exist without controlling behavior. Clients can still act in line with values. Experiential techniques make these lessons tangible, helping clients internalize them more deeply than abstract explanation alone. In practice, metaphors and experiential exercises are not just stories, they're lived experiences in the therapy room. They help clients shift perspective, recognize the limits of old strategies, and embrace new ways of relating to their thoughts and emotions. And when clients carry these metaphors into daily life, they become reminders that even when the mind is noisy, they can still move toward what matters.
Thank you all for being part of this journey through acceptance and commitment therapy. We've covered a lot of ground together: mindfulness practices, values clarification, metaphors and experiential techniques, and the ways ACT helps us face depression with flexibility and resilience. Before we close, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the Freedom for Eternity channel. By subscribing, you'll stay connected to more trainings and resources that can support your growth. Please also forward this video to someone who might benefit from it. Sometimes a simple share can make a big difference in someone's life. And don't forget to like and comment. Your feedback helps us refine and expand the work we're doing. To quickly summarize the main steps we've explored: mindfulness practices, staying present, observing without judgment, and grounding ourselves in moments of distress. Values clarification. Identifying what truly matters, bridging values with goals, and revisiting them as life evolves. Metaphors and experiential techniques. Learning through vivid examples like tug of war with the monster and passengers on the bus. Addressing challenges. Normalizing resistance, clarifying values when they feel distant, gently confronting avoidance, and breaking change into manageable steps. Committed action. Taking small, consistent steps guided by values, even when emotions are heavy. One last emphasis. Revisit this whole training. At times, it's impossible to remember everything in one go. Each time you return, you'll notice new insights and deepen your understanding. ACT is not about perfection. It's about practice, persistence, and living in alignment with what matters most. So once again, thank you for your time, your openness, and your commitment to learning. Stay connected, keep practicing, and let's continue building resilience together.